My education has been very much hands-on. I taught myself 6 languages. I taught myself my career. The way that education is taught in the United States particularly doesn't resonate with the way that I learn. Because of that, I left school to teach myself everything that I wanted to know, and I did it. So I didn't get the opportunity to study abroad. Instead, I just randomly decided to go abroad and learn on the job while being abroad, which honestly was such a rich and very educational experience for better or for worse.
Welcome to Flourish in the Foreign, the award-winning podcast that celebrates, elevates, and affirms the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad, while exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. I'm your host, Christine Job, a Black American with Trinidadian roots, business strategist and writer from Atlanta, based in Valencia, Spain. Hey everyone, welcome back to Flourish in the Foreign. I am your host, Christine. If you're new, hey, how are you? Welcome to the show. Welcome to your new favorite podcast. I'm so glad that you decided to check it out. Before we get into today's episode, I do have some announcements. Bum, 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 bum. First, I've got some really cool news to share with y'all. My good friend over at the Black Expat, Amanda Bates, who has been a guest on this here podcast, we've collaborated countless times throughout the years. She has opened up registration for Expat Well Financial Forum. This is a virtual event that features over 10 dynamic sessions on financial planning and international mobility. So think global money moves, wealth management strategies, and even budgeting as a family abroad. You can grab your ticket using the link in the description. Plus, it's a great way for you to support this here podcast at no extra cost to you. The Expat Well Financial Forum runs from March 15th to March 16th, so get your ticket now. Next, I want to remind you, don't forget to check out my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings. It's where I share my personal thoughts on life abroad. I'm journaling about my author journey and all that comes with that. And I'll be posting the full conversations with season 6 guests. So if you've ever wondered what gets left on the cutting room floor, this is your chance to dive deeper. And finally, I'm gearing up for the Ask Me Anything episode at the end of season 6. If you got a question for me, a guest, or an expert, be sure to submit it by the end of March 2025. You can email me at hello@flourishintheforeign.com or leave a voice note via the link in the description. And no worries if you don't want your voice on the podcast, just say that in your voice note and I won't put you on blast, okay? Let's get those questions answered, shall we? All right, let's get into today's episode. Season 6, Episode 8. Today's guest is Artemis Peacocke. Artemis is a world traveler, digital marketer, and language and culture enthusiast who documents her travels on her viral TikTok account. She uses social media to share insights on her unique experience integrating into various cultures and learning new languages, all while operating her successful social media management business abroad. I asked Artemis to record for the podcast because I'd been following her on TikTok and she's such a great storyteller and she'd had so many interesting experiences abroad. I just had to reach out and ask her to be on the show, and she was so generous to say yes and to be so candid in this interview. So, with that being said, I'm going to let Artemis tell y'all all about it.
I'm Artemis Peacocke. I'm currently 28 years old and I'm located in the Netherlands. I was actually born in New York, but I was raised in Atlanta, but I spent my adult life in Seattle. So when you're traveling abroad, people always ask you, where are you from? And I always just tell them Seattle, not only because that's where I came from, but because I feel like that's where my heart is. I feel like that's where I really got to grow into myself as a person. So I consider my hometown to be Seattle, even though I never even went to Seattle until I was about 19 years old. Because of that, I feel a little bit divorced from my hometown and where I was growing up at in Georgia, mostly because my childhood felt kind of like a prison. There were a lot of really serious restrictions imposed on me by my parents. I wasn't allowed to do things like go on class trips, like we couldn't eat anything that wasn't on our strict vegan diet. We couldn't watch cartoons for a good portion of it, couldn't go trick or treating, just things that normal children got to do. So, because of that, ever since I was young, I've been thinking, I want to be free. Like, I just want to go and fly. And so that's when I started learning my first foreign language, which was Japanese, because I was really interested in like anime and Japanese fashion ever since I was a kid. And probably some of it has to do with the fact that's probably as far as it gets in many respects from my hometown in Georgia. So ever since then, I really just wanted to separate my memories of what limited travel I got to do as a child, where it was just full of arguing from my parents in the car all the time, to being able to experience life and realize that all around the world, there are so many different ways that people live and exist. And it's not the only way that I knew. I remember when I was in therapy, when I started in 2016, my therapist asked me, what is your goal? Like, if you were to leave a therapy session and think this has been a success, what is your long term goal for therapy? And I told her, I just want to travel. I just want to be mentally healthy enough to be able to travel and explore the world and to see the things that I always wanted to see. And I think I did it. I made it. I consider my goal to be pretty much realized and everything that I wanted out of life. So I think that my childhood set the seed for me having this curiosity, this willingness to explore, to see the world, and most importantly, to learn more about other people and how other people live their lives and see different ways of living.
I asked Artemis if she attended university, and if she did, where did she attend? What did she study? And if she had the opportunity or interest to study abroad.
Oh, I went to university for about, I want to say a year. I don't think I made it a year. Honestly, school is not for me. Everything that I learned, I had to teach myself. So if somebody asks me, like, oh, do you have a degree? I'll just, you say, give them a cursory no. But I do wish people would more so ask what I was doing while my peers were out getting their degree. I consider myself like a star, skilled through alternative routes. Because of that, my education has been very much hands on. I taught myself 6 languages. I taught myself my career. The way that education is taught in the United States, particularly, doesn't resonate with the way that I learn. Because of that, I left school to teach myself everything that I wanted to know, and I did it. So I didn't get the opportunity to study abroad. Instead, I just randomly decided to go abroad and learn on the job while being abroad, which honestly was such a rich and very educational experience, for better or for worse. But if I had that structured experience to be able to study abroad, I do think that it wouldn't have been as exciting for me, but also wouldn't have been as much of a struggle trying to get my footing. So, yeah, I do wish I had that experience, but I don't regret not having it.
I asked Artemis what she was doing when her peers were in university, if she started off in Georgia or if she was already in Seattle. And since she said instead of studying abroad, she just went abroad, I asked her to take us along that journey of development and DIY study.
So I actually left Georgia right after I dropped out of college. Me and my now husband decided that we were going to flip a coin and decide whether we were going to go to Portland or Seattle for a Christmas vacation that my in laws had decided that they were going to send us on because they wanted us to explore as well. And so we flipped a coin, it landed on heads. We went to Seattle. We were just there for vacation for a week and we decided, you know what, this is awesome. Let's just move here. My husband is very similar to me. He's got a very free spirit. He's just down for whatever. So instead of moving to a new apartment like we had planned, 2 weeks later, we had packed all of our stuff in our car, including our cat, who's still with us, and drove out to Seattle. And that's where we decided to live. So while my peers were in school, I was out founding the largest outdoor recreational roller skating group in the Pacific Northwest using literally nothing but social media. So my trade is marketing. And I taught myself everything through trial and error, through getting multiple certifications to be able to build this group. And it got pretty big. Like we have articles published about us in Elle Magazine, the Seattle Times, Pacific Northwest Magazine, NPR's KUOW. Like it was a pretty big deal. So I got really hands-on experience, not just from my field, but from starting over, rebuilding everything for myself and just creating a life that I felt that I wouldn't need like a vacation from. So I decided to get a remote job based off of the marketing knowledge that I taught myself. That turned out to be a mess, which is why I work for myself right now, because I decided that after the experience that I had working for like marketing agencies, I was like, this is just not for me. And then I decided to use that to be able to work from wherever I wanted to. So I went to Turkey for no reason. I just could, and I wanted to do that. And my husband said, okay, we will do that. So I paid for us all to go out there. I got laid off of my job like 2 months later, 3 months later. That's when I had to start my business out of necessity. So I wasn't homeless in a country where I didn't know anybody. I was struggling to learn the language. So I really didn't have much of a choice. It was like a sink or swim situation because of the choices that I made. But honestly, I would make those choices all over again. It was an experience that I wouldn't trade for the world, but oh my gosh, it was so difficult. I didn't know what I was doing. I just booked a one-way flight and I was like, okay, I just sold all my stuff and upped on the plane. I thought, okay, maybe I'll be here for 3 months, maybe I'll be here for 6 months. The issue was when I got there, I was planning on getting a year-long residency permit because I had friends who had done it and they were like, oh my gosh, Artemis, it's going to be so fun. Come on, it's so easy to get residency. And the month that I arrived, they changed the residency rules so that you would only be able to get residency for 6 months and then not at all in Istanbul where I was planning to live. So I met this guy who turned out to be a scammer who introduced me to a guy who was less of a scammer. And he filed an application for me. He said, I can get you residency, no problem. He filed the application for me, and I realized that he did it in another city where I was not living. So we got the residency cards. It said the city that I only been to once for the application process because I just thought that's where like all the offices were. But it was because he filed in a different city, which is not legal, which now I know that. He's just over here committing casual fraud on my behalf. And I get stopped by the police one day after I get my residency permit. And they say, do you have a residency card? And I was like, yeah, I do. Just coming off the bus, minding my business. And I show it to them and they say, this says Fethiye. It doesn't say Istanbul. Why aren't you in Fethiye? And keep in mind, my Turkish at this point isn't fantastic because I just got there. And I said, tatil için, like for vacation. Looked at me, looked at my husband, looked at me again. Okay, you're free to go. Okay. So we go and I call the guy who had done the application. I said, why did this guy ask me why I'm not here in the city? And he says, yeah, technically you would need to be there if you wanted to renew, but it's no big deal. We can figure that out when we get there, the permit renewal. And so a week after that, I got laid off of my job. What we had to do was fly to that city, search for housing, literally right away. And at this point, I had crammed all the Turkish I would need to know to look for an apartment. So I spoke enough Turkish within the next 2 week period to be able to find a house because the only people I could get in contact there who were honest only spoke Turkish. And I did it. I connected with a real estate agent. We were like talking in person, connected with a landlord, and I found us a really cute apartment that was so perfect for us at the time. But now I'm in this city where I don't know anybody except for my landlord. My husband didn't have a job at the time. I didn't have a job and my Turkish was rudimentary. And I did not know if I'd be able to even stay in the country because of the weird renewal process. You know, you had to have your registration at an address in that city. To do that, you had to have a utility bill, and they couldn't do that for us in Istanbul. So I finally got the registration in Fethiye, where I was supposed to be. But it's a very small town. It's a small town. So there was really nothing going on there, especially during the off season. Like sometimes there are tourists, but like when you are in the off season, like during fall or during winter when I had arrived, there was not much going on. And that made it really easy to kind of network with the locals because, again, it's not like there's like a bunch of tourist attractions or anything. So thankfully, I was adopted by my landlord who integrated me into her lifestyle almost seamlessly. I was just like the quirky foreign friend who barely spoke any Turkish. They taught me the language. They made my life really comfortable, checked on me when I was having a hard time. And throughout that process, I was building my business as well. So you have on one hand, I'm cramming to learn a language while trying to figure out how to stay abroad with this residency permit rule changes, which by the way, in Turkey change all the time for no discernible reason. And I have me trying to build my business while learning the language, or else I'm going to literally be homeless. I had no money. At one point, I had to borrow $1,000 from a girl on Facebook who I barely speak to. Yes, I paid her back. Yes, we're still connected, but it was a very desperate situation. So, like you were saying, people don't realize that you need that kind of tenacity if you're going to make that kind of move. You have to have a very specific personality for it. I don't know if I have the personality for it, but I know I have the drive for it.
I asked Artemis to describe her overall time in Turkey.
I went to Turkey in, I think, 2022. Wow, I had to look at the calendar. It feels like 4 lifetimes ago. But I was only in Turkey for about a year and a half. Um, so a lot of people are really surprised to hear that because I have so many stories from Turkey. But it's because the entire time I was there, I did not rest one single bit. I was always doing something because my landlord made sure that I was constantly being exposed to new people, new parts of the culture, because she knew that how much I love cultural anthropology and learning about different cultural traditions. And honestly, they were really honored by it. Because of that, I became fluent in the language in a little less than a year because nobody there spoke any English or very basic English. They can say random words like refrigerator and half sentences like, can you go? And just kind of trail off after that. So I learned Turkish very quickly because of that. Yeah. But for the most part, I was literally only there for a year and a half before, again, another law changed, probably the fifth one in that year, that disallowed people in my situation to continue to live in Turkey without buying property. Not only do I not have property rental money, but if I did, I don't know if I would want to purchase property in Turkey. I just don't think that would make much sense for me and the way that I want to live my life in general. We had to quickly figure out somewhere else to go. It was honestly heartbreaking on two levels. So the first level, because I had become very comfortable. I have all my friends there. I had built this life that not only I was very interested by, but a lot of people had started to follow my story around that time online as well, because I do like video logs about my cultural findings and my experiences with traditional Turkish culture and how it blends into modern Turkish culture and things like that. So when I found out that I had to leave, the second part of my heartbreak was realizing that a lot of the people who were supposed to be like supporting me, the friends that I had made outside of my landlord's circle, they were not supportive at all. I was telling them what a hard time I was having, and that support system was not nearly as tight as I thought it was. The only people who were really there for me were, like, of course, my long term friends, my landlord, and the friends I met through her, and random people on the internet who I have never spoken to before in my life. Very supportive people on TikTok. And I feel like if it wasn't for that platform, I don't think I would have gotten through it. So the biggest criteria for me to try to figure out where to go was a place where I could just settle down for a while. Because after all the constant law changes in Turkey, which I wish someone had told me about that beforehand, that the entire world is a lot more of a bureaucratic nightmare than the United States, which I thought that was a pretty low bar to clear, but apparently not. I feel like if I had known that, I would have picked a place with more stability. And so that was what I wanted. So I was looking into places that had digital nomad visas because now my business was a lot more successful. I've been grinding for a year and now I could be able to qualify for pretty much any digital nomad visa that I wanted. I chose Greece because not only was it nearby and I had a cat who was too young for her shots to be able to get her pet passport. So we had to easily be able to get the cat into the EU, but they had a digital nomad visa that you could get for 2 years. And I thought, okay, 2 years is a long time. Like, I was only in Turkey for less than 2 years and I already feel like I've lived 12 lives. So let's do it. So I packed up everything, drove over to Greece, or got one of those like international EU cab things, which I didn't even know was a thing. Went to Greece and we settled into Athens. By this time, I had already started learning the Greek language, so I had a functioning command of the language as well. While we were preparing my other cat's paperwork, all of this stuff that we had to sort out. When we landed in Athens, it was like a breath of fresh air at the time. But I ended up not staying. I do think that at first I was really hesitant to move to Athens because the lady I was taking Greek lessons from told me that it was like an awesome place. Now, her and I look very different. She is from Europe. She is a white woman. And so I was thinking maybe that does color her experience, but she has such high praise for it. Like that can't be, everything that's to it, right? So I decided that I was going to take her word for it. And I went to Athens instead of going to Thessaloniki like I originally wanted to do. And it wasn't a great experience at all, actually. The only word I would use to describe it is a nightmare. It really made me appreciate a lot of the little things in life. Because of that, I appreciate my time in Turkey a lot more as well, mostly because even though it wasn't the most stable place to be or even close, I did have a pretty solid support system there. So I think that's another really important thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like when you're choosing a place to live, being able to be comfortable is one thing, the visa process is another thing, having a support system there is another, and just livability. I wish I had really looked into what life in Athens is like, not just for locals, but for immigrants like myself as well. Um, so when I was choosing Greece as a place to live, even though I did do a lot of research, I even learned the language to a conversational degree in just maybe six to 8 months. There was a lot more than what you can find out like online. Like it's definitely something that you have to experience. I wouldn't really recommend a lot of people to try to have that experience if you really do not have a support system in that country because it was definitely rough.
I asked Artemis how long she was in Greece. Then I asked her to tell me why was her experience, as she put it, nightmarish.
So I was actually in Greece for only 8 months. I planned on when I first arrived in Greece, I had every intention of being in Greece for at least 2 years. And I thought, oh, there's also a pretty solid renewal process. Maybe I'll get to stay for another 2 years. And I was so excited about that. I was so gung ho about learning the language. I was trying to network and talk to locals, pretty much being the perfect guest, so to speak. Really expanding my horizons and learning as much about the language and culture as I could. So I think the biggest issue with Greece that made it nightmarish for me, for locals, for other immigrants as well, is that nothing there seems to work. There's a lot of corruption, not just in the government, but I personally experienced some medical neglect in Greece, which caused me to lose part of my vision in my left eye due to this medical neglect. And no, there's no fixing it. It's a scar in the direct center of my cornea that cannot be fixed, period. There's this system where if you have a major surgery in Greece, you also are kind of expected to like bribe doctors as well. And if you're a foreigner and you have something really serious wrong and you don't know this, then you're going to be in trouble because these doctors aren't going to do their best work because they are horrifically underpaid. Um, because of this underpaying issue, it permeates throughout all professions in Greece. So you're interacting with people on a daily basis who aren't being paid what they're worth. And life in Greece, because of that, is really difficult. If you don't know someone in the government and you're trying to get a job in Greece, you're going to be in trouble. And that affects locals a lot. They're very hyper aware of the economic situation, of the corruption that makes it so difficult to improve that economic situation. And that also harbors resentment towards foreigners as well. I think half and half of the people that I've met in real life in Greece were like half of them were like very nice and welcoming and experiencing that Greek hospitality that people know Greece by it. It's very notorious. And the other half have that harbor resentment towards foreigners. It doesn't matter what kind of foreigner you are. You're either like a refugee who's coming to steal jobs in their mines, or you're a rich foreigner coming to price them out of housing. And there was really no winning in that situation, even if you're there pretty much for cultural research and to spread knowledge about the country and the culture. There's no discerning on that. I've actually heard, like for the first time, I didn't experience this in the States, not in Turkey, nowhere else. Just get out of my country. which is a very jarring sentiment. It doesn't matter why you're there. It just matters that immigrants and expats and transplants make a very good scapegoat for a lot of the country's systemic issues, which do mostly center in corruption, whether that's economic, governmental corruption. It's very serious. But because of that, and a lot of people don't have that kind of discernment to be able to unpack those issues to the core of where they are. So a very easy finger to point would be it's because you people who are not us are in our country, things like that. I experienced a lot of that. So because of that, I would say Greece isn't a very welcoming place to live for foreigners and for locals as well. Locals do struggle a lot. But the biggest kind of thing for me was experiencing medical issues while there and not being able to find the help that I needed, having to get three different opinions. And then the third opinion was the one that was like, oh, it's too late for this opinion. Now your eye is kind of screwed. There were like the racism was pretty intense for me. The bureaucratic nightmare was just a lot for the residency permit. So the final straw for me was when they changed the laws again so that you wouldn't be able to renew the permit unless now you have a certain income level, or now the income has to come from a certain place and things like that. There are people who were in Greece for a while who were told that they would have to leave their homes because of this new permit sort of rules. And so with the permit that I was applying for, they even told me that I did get scammed by the lawyer. And I was arguing with him about that as well. So that was just another thing. There were a lot of scams going on. And the lawyer told me that it'll be squared away in 5 months, no big deal, because you're one of the good foreigners with money, right? Turns out that was also one of the many lies that he told. The backlog for residency permits in Greece at that time turned out to be like a year and a half. So there are people who are waiting for almost 2 years and they heard nothing, or people who have been waiting for 2 years and then they got their permit rejected even though they met the qualifications. And then they were told, you have to leave the country. You have 10 days to leave. And they had already been there for like years with no permit, not able to navigate society. And that was my experience as well. While I was in Greece, I had the legal right to stay in Greece, but I wasn't able to have a residency permit or the rights of a residency permit. So I was pretty much trapped in the country for the entire time that I was there. And when I found out about the rule changes and the backlog, I was like, no, I cannot do this. It just felt like an openly hostile place to try to immigrate to. Between that and just meeting probably the worst people that I've met in my life, I decided that I just could not stay. And I know I haven't been on this planet for that long, only 28 years. But in my 28 years, I have never met people who are so just like hostile. Obviously, not like all Greek people, not even close, but it's a very loud majority. And I've had the very bad luck of encountering some of the most passionately awful people during my time in Greece. So I would say if you have a support system in Greece, or you have connections in Greece where people can make life easier for you, I would say go for it. But if you don't, it's not a place that I can say would be a very hospitable place for people to immigrate if they would like a life of ease.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. And if you are, please consider supporting this labor of love, but labor nonetheless, by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. Make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast, and please review the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to the show. Fun fact, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave me comments that I can actually respond to. Yeah. Make sure you follow the podcast on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and all the other social media platforms that the podcast has. If you want to read more of my personal truths and musings as I explore and navigate the intersection of migration, Blackness, womanhood, and wellness, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings by Christine Job. And for all other Flourish in the Foreign resources about moving, living, and thriving abroad, including guides, courses, and more, be sure to go to flourishintheforeign.com. Adaptations.com. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. Now, back to the episode. So, Artemis is experiencing immigration laws changing again, this time in Greece. And so I asked her, where did she and her husband decide to go next?
So the decision-making process for me to find country number three, I already had the Netherlands kind of as like my backup. After what happened in Turkey, I had the mindset of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I was prepared. I thought, okay, if this doesn't work out, the first thing that I did when I got comfortable-ish in my home in Greece was start applying for apostles for my important documents because I knew that if I were to need to go to the Netherlands specifically, I would need that, which was definitely a process for everybody listening. I would really highly recommend for you to just get your documents apostilled while you are in the United States because doing it from abroad, it's a headache. It's not fun, but it's definitely necessary. So I chose the Netherlands because, like I said, choosing a place where I already have a support system is very important to me. You know, I've been online ever since I was a little girl. I knew I wanted to spend all my time on the internet. So I had friends that I've met online like 15 years ago. We've been speaking the entire time for 15 years and they live in the Netherlands. I actually visited them last year when I lived in Turkey. I had a grand old time. Thought this place is awesome. There's great public transport and everybody is nice, which was my biggest qualifier for the experience that I had in Greece. So there's a program that allows Americans to move to the Netherlands if they own a business, if they want to move their business to the Netherlands. Why, that's me. I own a business now, and I was able to move my business to the Netherlands. And I've been here so far for 3 months now, and I have not met a single mean person. Obviously, I know that they're out there. I'm not foolish, but everybody is just really nice. And I think that goes a really long way for me personally when my biggest love is for talking to people and learning more about how they live their lives and what makes them tick. But the bureaucracy definitely helps because there's a process for everything. As someone who is neurodivergent, I really love being able to have those processes where, you know, if I just follow the rules and do what I'm supposed to do, there's not often any surprises. So because the Netherlands doesn't really have that many surprises, and they haven't had historically many surprises when it comes to immigration law, that was definitely making it an attractive option for me. The trickiest thing was getting out of Greece because I didn't have a residency permit. I couldn't legally travel outside of Greece because I had overstayed the 90 days that you were allowed in the Schengen area. So I was spending a lot of time networking with the consulate, trying to talk to the Dutch consulate, talking to the American consulate. How can I get out of this country? Because that was the biggest issue was that I didn't have residency, but I had legal residence in Greece. So after I called the Department of Immigration in the actual Netherlands, they said pretty much in a roundabout way, if you can find a way to get here, we will give you a residency permit. Okay, I applied for the residency permit while I was still in Greece. And so I took the confirmation that I was applying for residency permit. That is actually a legal right to stay in the Netherlands while you wait for your residency permit. So I could be in Greece legally while I waited. I could be in the Netherlands legally. How do I get there? So I talked to this very nice consulate officer. Again, everybody in this situation who I spoke to, super nice. And he was like, it's still in the EU. So getting there will not be a problem. And that's all I can say. I was thinking, what does that mean? What do you mean getting there is not going to be an issue? And I realized he means that there's no like intra-Schengen border checks as long as you're not going to a country that's hyper vigilant, like Germany always has them at the airport for some reason, or, Austria does sometimes. And sometimes they implement temporary border checks, which is the case for those two countries. And I think maybe Spain, I can't quite recall. But because of that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to go and see what happens. At this point, I just staying in Greece is hurting my soul and my spirit. I'm not going to do it. So I book a flight. I'm ready to fly out. I have 5 suitcases, 2 cats now, and a husband. And I have to figure everything out as always. And right before we're about to leave, about 10 hours beforehand, I get a message that the flight has been canceled because during that time, it was the tech outage. All the airlines were struggling. Do you remember that? A couple of months ago. Yeah. So because of that, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna have to figure out one last time. It was at 2 a.m. and I called five different taxis in Greece using my limited Greek, asking if they could take me to the airport literally right now because I was like, I'm just gonna get up early. The only other flight that wasn't full was 5 a.m. Can you get me to the airport? I have a flight in 3 hours. And until I found someone who could actually do it, I tipped that guy half my wallet and we made it to the airport. And even though the outage was intense, we were able to actually get there and get through seamlessly, get on the plane with the cab because they now had their EU passports because I was prepared. I was like, I'm not going to get caught slipping again. And I was able to go to the Netherlands that way. The entire experience was enlightening because I learned a lot about myself and my own resiliency. But if I had chosen any other country, I don't think that it would have worked out that way. So when I arrived in the Netherlands, they gave me a residency permit in like 3 weeks or something like that. Whereas I was waiting in 8 months in Greece, and I didn't cancel that residency permit application just to A, stress out my scammer lawyer when he gets a notification that I need to come in for biometrics, and B, just to see how long it would actually take. I'm so curious, and they still haven't gotten back to me. It's been almost a year since I applied in Greece. Are they going to get back to me next year? Is it going to be next week? Are they going to forget that I even applied? Who knows? I'm just curious at this point. But right now, I'm in a situation that I wanted to be in. I'm stable. I'm surrounded by amazing people, and I'm able to focus on my business and learning more about the world around me, which is perfect for me. I think my goal is probably to get permanent residency in the Netherlands because I'm tired. Historically, humans have always gone where the path of least resistance has been, wherever that might be. That's why most people in the world stay within a couple of miles of their hometown, regardless of the strength of their passport. It's because when you are traveling, there's a lot that you have to consider. There's a lot of things you have to go through. There might be like language barriers, less so here in the Netherlands, but business and life is still generally conducted in the Dutch language. I live right now around, like in a suburb around The Hague, not in The Hague, but around there. Everyone in my apartment building is also very old, which I love because I think every anthropologist who's obsessed with culture loves speaking to elders. And their English isn't so great, and some of them don't speak any English at all. So it makes it really great to be able to learn the Dutch language. And I do plan on being here for the foreseeable future. As far as the path of least resistance goes for me, I think that's what that would be. Going back to the United States would be a lot. I don't have a home there. I don't really have, my in-laws are supportive, but I don't really have an extensive network of supportive family, especially not like my biological family. I don't speak to most of them. My job is remote, so it's not like going back there would make it easier for me to work or anything. There's just no reason for me to go back to the States. So right now, the easiest thing to do would be to focus on building my business, being here in the Netherlands and settling down so that I don't have to worry about residency changes or fighting to stay in the country in general and all of the unsavory things that being a true digital nomad entails. You don't really get to learn that much when you're constantly on the go. So I think that this would be a really nice way to settle and make a home base and then maybe travel around to other countries for short term so that I can see what's going on there. But for now, that's the long term plan. But who knows? It might change in 2 weeks. I've learned better than to try to be too married to train of thought.
I asked Artemis to reflect upon her experience as a Black woman abroad. And if she feels as if her time abroad has changed how she identifies as a Black woman.
Yeah, so this is something that I've thought a lot about throughout the past couple of months, even years, because being Black for the majority of my life has been a very core part of my identity. I'm very proud of my heritage, very proud of my culture. Black American culture in general is something that a lot of people love to overlook our contributions to global culture and trends and things like that. And I think that our culture is beautiful and so fun and innovative. However, when I'm traveling abroad, for the most part, I'm American first, which I was thinking before I moved here. How is that possible? Nobody knows that I'm American until I open my mouth and tell them. Like, first of all, I learned that's not true. Somehow people can pinpoint me as an American from a mile away, and apparently it's how I dress, the way that I carry myself. I'm not quite sure about that. It's not a skill that I have developed. I honestly have no clue where people are from just by looking at them, but a lot of people do. And also, they will open their mouths to ask very quickly if they can't figure out where you're from. So it tends to be a very good uh, identifier for a lot of people so that they can suss out how to treat you. As someone who has friends who are from all around the world, I have friends with very quote unquote weak passports that don't allow you visa free access to many countries where you get looked at with skepticism when you present your passport to officials for whatever reason. And while I was aware of the experience, seeing the difference in how easy it is for me to navigate the world compared to others, and seeing the difference in how people treat me based off of my nationality has really made me identify more as like an international citizen more than anything. I'm not even from a specific place in the US. I don't even identify with my hometown there or where I was born. And I don't even identify being strictly like American because if I go back to America now with everything that I've learned and seen, even just these few years, I feel like my experience as an American would be very different from other people's as well. So I consider myself definitely more of an international citizen now, while still being very proud of and aware of my culture and how it helps me navigate the world. I do feel like me being Black has had a massive effect on the way that people treat me more so in like Europe, Western Europe more particularly. Like when I was in the UK, I could see the difference between how people treated me versus my husband, who is a white guy. When I was in Italy, particularly, I saw a massive difference on how I was treated with my white girlfriends between them. And it was very jarring for me because we were all Americans. So there was only one other thing that it could possibly be. But other than that, I find that most people abroad actually treat me very well. I had great experiences in Ireland. Most people in London were very nice to me. Most people in the Netherlands are very nice to me. I find that me being American definitely has more of an effect on the way that I navigate the world now. And I didn't identify strongly as being an American, but just little things about American culture, specifically Black American culture as well. Really, I didn't realize how niche they were until I moved. For example, even little things that we do, like we boil our tea in a pot on the stove rather than in a kettle everybody else uses, or little things like that. We're used to be able to drive everywhere. We're here in the Netherlands, everybody, their first instinct is to just take their bike. And I know a lot of Americans, majority of Americans that I know, don't even know how to ride a bike. I intimately identify with more so my experiences than where I'm from, but I am who I am, and it definitely has a massive effect on how I navigate the world, just in a very different way than I expected when I first left the States.
Healthcare. I was really curious to learn more about Artemis's experience with healthcare across Turkey, Greece, and the Netherlands. And I asked her, as she reflected upon her experience, if she could possibly even compare it to her experiences of healthcare in the United States.
Yeah, I think this is so important because it's something that a lot of people don't consider before they leave. Obviously, that healthcare is going to be an issue, just something as basic as finding housing could be an issue. But a lot of people have this stereotype in their heads, particularly Americans, that everywhere in Europe, healthcare is superior to the United States. But personally, that has not been my experience. And I was just as shocked as probably many listeners are to hear that, mostly because I've had experience in all of the countries with healthcare that I've been to or that I've lived in. In Turkey, my experience with healthcare was fantastic. The biggest issue with Turkish healthcare right now is a lot of the doctors are disillusioned. There's a shortage of doctors because of that. And it's in Turkish culture to go to the doctor when you're just sick, which is fine. But it does create like a very large burden on the Turkish healthcare system because they have like public system and then private system like many countries do, to the point where I would just be sick with a cold in Turkey. And, I'm American. I'm used to not really going to the hospital unless I'm like dying. But all of my friends were like, Artemis, hastaneye git, go to the hospital. And I'm like, for what? What are they going to do at the hospital? Oh, you need vitamins. You need an IV vitamin drip and then you'll be fine. I'm like, I'm not going to the hospital for that. I'd be very upset about it because I thought I was like neglecting myself because culturally it's acceptable to do that sort of thing because I'm used to it being readily accessible. And I've had really good experiences in the healthcare system in Turkey. In Greece, like I explained about my eye, that was like the biggest healthcare experience that I had in Greece. And the second experience I had with healthcare in Greece was also not pleasant. I had an infection. My lymph nodes were swollen. I had to pay $600 for tests in Greece. And then the person who called me to try to explain the tests didn't speak any English. And while I speak Greek, it's not good enough for medical jargon. My English is barely good enough for that. So I had her email me the results, but there was no context behind it. So I actually had to have a nurse practitioner friend in the United States tell me that I had an infection and what was going on, which was, again, very just scary because I was under the assumption I'm not in the States. I shouldn't have this issue. And since healthcare was so good in Turkey and it's very culturally similar, that was going to be the same. I didn't know about like the medical bribe system. Thankfully, I didn't have to have a major operation. But if I did, then that definitely would apply as well. In the Netherlands, I'm also not a fan of the healthcare here, actually. It's one of the only things about this country that gives me pause because the system here is very, very hands off in the sense that I had a bladder infection and they tell me what apparently they notoriously tell everybody who has any kind of issue, wait a week and then call back. You can't really do that with a bladder infection because if it turns into a kidney infection, it can go septic. You can even die from it. It's very serious. So that was jarring for me. I eventually did get the medication that I needed, but in the United States, we're more used to treating symptoms with serious things like that and then doing tests later to confirm. But there's also a lack of preventative care. So if there's no issue, you come in and you say, I have this issue, and it hasn't been happening for like an egregious amount of time, or they don't think that it's serious enough, they will still they'll still tell you to just wait a week because they want to lessen the burden on the healthcare system. The issue here in the Netherlands politically is that they have a aging population that is outpacing like other populations and other demographics. Because of that, there's a very heavy burden on the healthcare system because older people require more medical care, which makes them even more hands off in their care and very reactive in their care. So even though in a lot of European countries, healthcare is great, I wouldn't say that the Netherlands is one of those countries, which is really surprising considering how modern like a lot of the other infrastructure is. I was really surprised by that for sure.
I asked Artemis to describe how has living abroad and everything she and her husband have gone through has affected her marriage.
At first, it was very turbulent. Me and my husband, we've been together for 10 years now. We've never had any like major issues. But the very beginning part where I told you about we were in Turkey, I was laid off, we got scammed, none of us had a job. That was very stressful. It was a lot of, having to realize the value of teamwork. So when we were able to put our heads together after 5 months of just, what is going on here? And work together as a team, it made our marriage so much stronger. There's literally nothing that we can go through now that will be stressful than being stranded in a country on the other side of the world with no job or permission to work. Absolutely nothing. So I realized if we can survive that, we can literally survive anything. And ever since then, we definitely have our unique skills, my husband and I. I can learn a language just by hearing it for some godforsaken reason. So I do a lot of the talking, a lot of the bureaucratic navigating, and I'm also a businesswoman. And he's a very hands-on person. So he really likes doing things like cooking, driving, organizing things so that we can actually make life easier for ourselves. Navigating, which when you're abroad, that's definitely a skill that I can get lost trying to find the bathroom at McDonald's. Definitely a skill that's much needed. And obviously we're both working right now. So I do think that most couples would not have been able to troubleshoot their way out of the things that my husband and I have had to troubleshoot our way out of. Um, and it's made him very hyper aware of how much, how different life is when you're traveling as a Black woman versus him. So even though he is a white guy, he obviously understands that the way that we navigate life is different. But seeing it in the context of traveling throughout different countries and just seeing blatantly how I'm treated versus how he's treated, it's actually made him furious. He is definitely more, I wouldn't say he's radicalized, but he is very quick to step in and say, absolutely not on my watch, because now he knows what it looks like. Whereas I've had almost 30 years to figure out what it looks like. His eyes are mostly open now. There's no question about it. Obviously, it could be some sexism at play with the differences in how we're treated, but a lot of the time, if you're kind of observing how other people are being treated, he's like, oh no, absolutely not. This is not sexism. This is definitely misogynoir. And he's definitely a good rock to have because of that.
Artemis speaks 6 languages. Let me repeat that again. Artemis speaks 6 languages. So, for those of you who are listening and who are like, I don't need to speak another language, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And in fact, I always encourage y'all to start years before you think about moving abroad. Yeah. And how about this? It doesn't matter if you think you're going to move to Portugal. So you start with Portuguese and then it turns out you're going to move to somewhere that speaks French or Spanish or whatever. Because is it a waste of time to learn language? No, it's never a waste of time. I know I don't have to say this to y'all because y'all listen to this podcast, but get in those books, get online, get in the language exchanges, and become fluent in another language. I'll step off my soapbox now. Artemis, she speaks 6 languages, y'all. So I had to ask her, how did she teach herself 6 languages? And I asked her to walk us through this process and definitely give us some advice on learning language.
My theory is when you're learning a language as a child, the way that you learn is through listening to things that people are saying to you in your everyday life. Whenever I need to say something, I will write it down on one of my flashcards, my online flashcards, and I'll write down the translation as well. And I will practice it until I know it. And then I will study all my flashcards every day. So I'm adding about 10 flashcards a day using this method because when you're out and about, for instance, when I was out and about in Turkey, I'll need to know how to ask, can I have this bank statement? Like I was doing everything in Turkish, banking, residency process. Literally nobody spoke English in a small town in Turkey. You're navigating banks, markets, immigration stuff, day-to-day things like going to the store and asking if they have a specific size of paper that you might need to print something off, like literally everything. And I would memorize it on my phone even while I was like on the bus, on the train, while I was walking. It's mostly about integrating the language into your life in such a way that you're actually going to speak. One thing that I would advise people to do, even with this method, is to not be afraid of sounding stupid. Because more often than not, I don't take myself seriously, so it hasn't been a problem for me. But more often than not, people are just going to be really happy that you're making an attempt to learn their language because a lot of people don't. And that's been my experience. And I think that's why people are so warm to me in the Netherlands because not a lot of people have the motivation to learn Dutch. But almost every time I approach somebody, I'm doing it in the Dutch language. Even if I have to stop the conversation halfway through and ask, spreek du Engels? Do you speak English? Or kunnen we Engels spreken? Can we speak English? And they'll be totally fine with that. I find that it really goes a long way in helping your experience. So even though there were some rough patches, I feel like it would have been a lot worse if I did not speak the local language. And in every instance I do. The only instance where I feel like it didn't matter so much was actually in Greece because I have a Greek name. I just do. They will assume that I have a Greek heritage and I just didn't bother to learn the language properly, not knowing that I've only been in Greece for maybe 2, 3, 4 months. And the level that I speak is impressive for that. But they'll say, this is an Artemis. Obviously, she's just some kind of international school transplant who is divorced from her half Greek heritage. And that just wasn't the case. So people got more frustrated with me because of that. But for the most part, people were really impressed if they know the truth. Okay, I just got here. I'm doing my best. And that's been the case for literally every country I've been to.
I asked Artemis what has been her experience cultivating community in all of the countries she has lived in thus far.
I'm not going to lie, this has been the part where I struggled the most because I got so lucky in both, in Seattle and in Turkey. In both of those places, I was able to cultivate a community that was so strong and loving and genuinely supportive. I actually took it for granted. I thought this will be easy. I'm a personal person. I'm an extrovert. It's not going to be difficult at all. However, one thing that I became hyper aware of is the fact that it all depends on the cultural context of which you exist. So a lot of the community building strategies or the way that you approach people come off a very different way depending on where you are. In Turkey, I was lucky to be, I'm an extrovert, but I was adopted by one of the few people in this world who's more extroverted than I am. And because of that, it was like built in. But here in the Netherlands, for instance, I'm really struggling because the way that I come off, because I'm very American, I come off really strong. I come off really strangely to a lot of the people here. They're very, for instance, where an American might say, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing," or "You look fantastic." Someone who's Dutch would just be like, "That's nice." They literally don't have the vocabulary in the Dutch language to express those things. It's all just lekker. It's nice. Because of that, I feel like people don't see me genuinely. It makes it difficult to network with other people, including my built-in local friend group. I find that even their approach to hangouts is very different. They don't hang out very often, where I'm used to being around people all the time, or just casual things like in Turkey. I just say I'm going to the store, who wants to come with, and I just be like just a date to the store with my girlfriends. But here it's not really a thing. Everything's like kind of an event. I'm really trying to figure out for myself how cultivated community works in this part of the world. Because I thought that everywhere, as long as you're just a nice, genuine person, people are going to want to be around you. And I didn't realize that their interpretation of nice and genuine might be completely different from the interpretation that I'm used to. I feel like I've always belonged everywhere. And I wasn't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing until I think very recently. I used to get a little bit frustrated by it. Apparently, the people around me, including people online who consume my story in that capacity, find it hilarious. I'm just down for whatever. I can be friends with literally anybody, whether you're like from a very wealthy background with a life of massive privilege, or if you're just a random conservative Muslim lady in a village in Turkey. I can get along with pretty much anybody because I see people as not so different. I think that we're all pretty much the same. We all have the same energy. We're all very interconnected, and all of our experiences aren't nearly as different as would like to be led to believe, I think. So I find it very easy to integrate myself into most societies because I see differences in people and in cultures as the best thing ever. I think it's so interesting, whereas a lot of people are programmed to see it like you're different from us. So you're not, like, this is wrong or this is not okay. I don't accept that. So my feeling of belonging hasn't really wavered, except when I experienced blatant rejection for no discernible reason, which it could be prejudice, it could be literally someone having a bad day, it could be anything. And then I'm thinking, what is my place in how do I come off to people? How are people interacting with me? But I'm a person who has a very strong sense of self. Even though, of course, I have doubts. Do people think that I'm strange? Am I properly integrated? Am I an inconsiderate guest? At the end of the day, I know who I am. I know my intentions, and I know that I'm just a genuine, if not quirky person. For the most part, I don't really consider whether I belong places or not. I assume that I do. And when I'm told or it's implied that I don't, I am genuinely shocked. I don't know why I am this way, but I think it's a good thing now. I used to not be sure, but now I think it's fun.
So I became acquainted with Artemis through social media. Yeah, I was scrolling on TikTok and I stumbled upon one of her incredible TikTok videos where she was describing her experience. I think at the time was in Turkey. And so I want to ask her specifically about her social media presence because she has quite a large following. And what was her impetus to get on social media and to share her story?
Yeah, so I'll focus on TikTok because I have quite a few social media platforms with a varied history, a couple of 100,000 followers between all of my platforms. First one was Facebook, where I was just doing activist work and that got popular. And then on Instagram, I was doing roller skating stuff and then I got popular from that. And on TikTok, I actually just decided to share a story from my landlord's office, like the story of how I got into the office. Because I had barely been posting on TikTok, and when I did, it was random videos of my cat. I wasn't on TikTok. But I was thinking, I don't really have anyone who will understand this. I don't have anyone who will think, like, this is so unbelievable. I cannot believe this just happened. And it was just a story about how she just said, come to my office. And I was like, okay. And I went to her office, and then it was comical because they didn't expect me to speak Turkish. And so they were really like shocked and happy to see me to a very surprising degree. And one of the neighbors came in. It was a very communal environment. And she was like, I have a black friend. And then she went and she literally went next door and she brought me a black person. So a lot of people thought that the story was really funny. And I was like, there's got to be someone who's going to want to hear this. And that story went viral. And I honestly can't say I didn't expect it because I totally did. It was hilarious. And since then, I've just been telling stories about the community in Turkey, which is something that a lot of people find to be either relatable, like a lot of Turkish diaspora were like, yeah, that's how it is. You make it sound a lot better than it was, than I remember it, because that sort of community can feel really suffocating if you're raised with it. And then a lot of people who've never had that, like people like me, who grew up in an environment that was divorced from that kind of affection and that kind of community care, which I think a lot of my watchers are in the latter. There's also a lot of Black women who are watching and seeing, just getting hope by seeing that not every Black woman navigates the world in a way that's constant stress. Yes, there are stressful parts of it, but my time in Turkey was actually really nice. I have mostly just feel good stories from my time there. There was nothing there that was particularly horrifying. So I think that a lot of Black women like to see the fact that not everybody has these very negative assumptions about us. Particularly in Turkey, the biggest assumption about Black people is that we are just African students because there's a very sizable population of students. Like people say ignorant things that I also find hilarious. Some might not. Like I'll just be in the market and someone will say, "Where are you from?" And my friend will answer as is polite, "She's from America." And they'll just raise their fists and say, "Michelle Obama." And, I think it's hilarious. But a lot of Black women would understandably be like, "Excuse me?" So just little stories like that, just seeing how different people in the same background react to the same situations that I were put in. I was put in some very strange situations. And I'm very glad that I have a receptive audience of people hearing about them because I think people listen with an open mind and with appreciation. Whereas if I share stories locally, um, the context is different because not a lot of people can relate to me as a foreign Black woman, and they tend to be a little bit more on the hostile side because of that. But people on the internet tend to be baseline as hostile anyway. So I'm just really grateful that I have such a nice supportive community on TikTok that wants to receive what I share in a genuine capacity because it's really fun to share. I love telling stories.
I wanted to continue this conversation about social media because I find that a lot of people assume that if they go abroad, they have to become a content creator. And although documenting your experience for yourself is incredible and I fully support it, but I think there's a very strange notion. I'm not sure where people get this from, that they will go abroad, they'll become a content creator, they will amass a huge following that will fund their life abroad or somehow be very glamorous. And so I asked Artemis to reflect on that.
Okay, there's no real diplomatic way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. It's not going to happen. I find that a lot of the content creators in abroad who are creating content with that intent are doing so in an attempt to sell you something. So their lifestyle is going to be the thing that they're selling, and a lot of the times it's not an authentic one, like I said. So that leads to a lot of people being very jarred by my account where I'm talking about real issues that everybody has to contend with, like housing issues, healthcare issues, prejudice issues, bureaucratic nightmares on residency processing. This isn't a thing that someone who's posting about their five-star luxury trip to Mykonos is going to be telling you because they're trying to sell you something. I find that a lot of people who want to make money from their travel experiences, there's a place for that content. I do consume it as well. I think that it's feel-good content and it feels good to watch it. So sometimes I will watch it myself, but I find that it does come off as really disingenuous because of that. And on the money end, you're not really going to be making as much money as you think that you are, unfortunately. For the most part, I have a separate business. I do work in social media, but this predates my TikTok account by far. So my clients are like multi-million dollar clients in various different industries. Like I'm not an influencer anymore. I decided that, kind of attributing your self-worth to the numbers and the amount of money you can earn through sponsorships is not my thing. I haven't taken a single sponsorship on my TikTok account. My TikTok account is not monetized. I just have it there for fun. I don't want to mix my work with what I want to do for fun. It's because of that I don't do that. But I do encourage people to be hyper aware of the content that they're consuming and with what intent. Because if you're seeing people who are just monetizing their content, talking about what an amazing, flawless experience it is, I think that it can give people the wrong impression sometimes. But if you're going in and watching that content and okay, it's not all going to be sunshine and roses, but this is just something nice to watch, I think it's fine and I think it's lovely. I do like the distraction a bit too, but if that is other people's intent to earn money, it's not going to pay as much. And sometimes even if it does pay a lot, I don't think that personally it's worth the payoff because it actually is really stressful to always be on, always make everything into content. Everything has to be like a monetizable experience. I think that the cost for me is too high.
Artemis was 28 at the time of recording, and I still felt the need to ask her about aging abroad and whether she has experienced an evolution of beliefs on aging, or perhaps her plans on how she sees herself and her husband aging abroad has changed.
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I find that generally the thing that people are more afraid of when it comes to aging while specifically abroad is missing out on things. So, missing out on milestones from their family, from their friends, their parents aging, things like that. I do have nieces and nephews that sometimes I think it would be nice to be able to age with them and to see them growing up and things like that. I think that's what prevents a lot of people from going abroad. For me, I'm not really close to majority of my family, but the ones that I am close to, it would be nice to be closer to them. But I don't have such strong family ties to where it's something that deeply affects me. Oh my gosh, my parents are getting old. Like my nieces and nephews are growing up without me, things like that. Like, yeah, it's unfortunate. But I find that my need to explore and to create a life where at the end of it, I'm not going to think, I wish I did more. I wish I did that. I wish I did this kind of like outweighs that. In general, the time that I've spent abroad, even though it really hasn't been nearly as long as, you or even some of your other guests, I find that I've grown so much as a person that I'm more calm now. I'm still very curious, but I feel like I've become a little more jaded. That's not the kind of person I want to be. So I was thinking earlier what I want to attribute that to just aging, because everyone says, yeah, as you get older, you're just going to care about this less, things like that. Or if I'm just tired and if I just need a recharge period before I go out and explore. So that remains to be seen. But for the most part, I find that I would be aging and spending my time, my life, my experiences way differently if I had stayed in the United States. I feel like this is the experience that I was always meant to have. But if I stayed where I was kind of rooted and planted, where it would be comfortable, yes, it would have been more comfortable to just live and exist and age and grow. But the quality of that growth would have definitely been stunted for me personally. I don't think that everybody might feel that way, which is why a lot of people do stay put where they are. But for me, it was worth it. It is worth it for now. Talk to me again in 5 years.
Wellness. I asked Artemis what is her personal definition of wellness and how has that concept and practice of wellness evolved as she has been abroad.
So when I first came abroad, my concept of wellness was literally doing everything all the time, all at once. I thought that constantly being connected and experiencing life was what was going to make me it was going to fix me because it's all I wanted to do was travel. As I've evolved in my travels, I feel like I've aged 10 years in just 2.5, not in a bad way, but in a way that now I now understand that my wellness is totally contingent on the quality of people that I have in my life and having a healthy routine. As someone who loves to connect with people, who loves people in general, that is one of the most important things. And I have to be more picky about the people that I do keep around to avoid affecting my wellness and my mental health and my physical health as well. Because I started getting so sick when I started becoming, unhappy with my environment, like physically ill, which has never happened to me before. Just started getting like colds and infections and all this random crazy stuff. And realizing that my well being is contingent on not just community, but structure as well has really made me more self aware of the decisions that I make. Like, even from decision of where to go, how I'm going to structure my life, how I'm going to structure my business in such a way that I'm able to have time to live my life while still providing for myself and, my cats. So it's definitely changed. And I think the definition for me of wellness is still flexibly changing. I'm starting to get into things like trying to work out again. I used to love doing Pilates when I was in Turkey, just trying to find a way to explore what that means for me and in what capacity, and applying it genuinely and not feeling like I have to do this for the sake of my wellness, but actually doing things to help curate a life surrounded by and based in my own wellness and self care.
Thank you so much, Artemis, for your candor and your generosity. I really appreciate you sharing your story with all of us. If you want to keep up with Artemis, you can via social media.
Yeah, if you guys would like, please feel free to follow me, keep up my adventures. All of my handles are Fairyne, FairYne, which is just my middle name, but with extra letters. I really look forward to seeing you guys on there.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. To learn more information about this guest, be sure to check out their show notes page on the website flourishintheforeign.com. If you'd like me to come speak to your group, your organization, your sorority, your company, or any other type of entity, I can. Yes, did you know that? I can. I am available for paid speaking engagements, which includes in-person talks as well as remote talks. Yes, I do travel. I really do. If you're interested in booking me for an in-person or remote paid speaking engagement, you can find my media kit, my speaker page, and all booking information on the website flourishintheforeign.com, also on my personal website, christinejob.com, and in the description of this here episode. If you'd like to delve deep into my personal thoughts about life abroad, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings. If you enjoy this solo indie Black woman podcast, be sure to support this podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. You can also support the podcast by subscribing to the podcast, leaving a review of the podcast, and of course, sharing the podcast. For resources like the Move Abroad with Intention guide and course, be sure to check the links in the description of this episode and the website flourishintheforeign.com. To learn more about me, Christine Job, my work as a business strategist, and all my resources about business strategy, building a business, and more, check out the links in the description of this episode and go to christinejob.com. Big thanks to all of you, my lovely listeners who have kept this podcast going strong for 6 seasons. Thank you all so much. I love you and I appreciate you. And thanks to Zachary Higgs for producing the music for this here podcast. Remember, it is not about moving abroad. It's not about being abroad. It's about thriving abroad. It's about flourishing abroad. So go abroad and cultivate a life well lived. See you next time. Bye. In the next episode of Flourish in the Foreign.
And I just remember, even as a child, I have this memory of being there, playing with my little Barbie dolls, and just thinking, there is some place in the world that sparkles, and I'm supposed to be in that place in the world. And I didn't know where it was. I didn't have any concept of it. I think this is a memory of me being like 4 or 5, right? But I just remember thinking like, there's some place in this world that sparkles, and like that's where I'm supposed to be.